Randy Kavanaugh here from the Armored Garage, and welcome to episode 2 of Pep vs. Print, the show where we build two identical props, one through Pepakura and one through 3D printing. Last episode, we started prepping our Stormtrooper helmet. We went over scaling and the initial steps for converting a PEP file into 3D printing. Today, we're going to get our scale PEP file laid out and ready to print, as well as start prepping our 3D model for slicing. The tools we'll be using for today's episode are Armorsmith for the Pepakura work, which is a tool I've been developing personally, though it is still in alpha, which kind of translates to save frequently. Alternatively, you can use Pepakura Designer and all the same principles will apply. For our 3D printing work, we'll be using 3D Studio Max to do any 3D model manipulation, and a version of Cura to slice up our model into G-code, which is what the 3D printer can digest. Again, if you find I'm going over any of these concepts too fast, please leave me a message in the comments and I can go over those items in greater detail in future episodes. Okay, before we dive into the rest of the prep work, I just wanted to take a few minutes to compare what a Pepakura helmet looks like versus a 3D printed one. For this comparison, I have a foam Iron Man helmet I made and a Batman helmet which I printed out. You can really achieve great quality with either one. First up, this Iron Man helmet, built with EVA foam and then treated with a few different layers of finishing material, which I'll dig into a little bit deeper in future episodes. The nice thing with the foam is that it's a little flexible, still has a great finish, and it's comfortable to wear. The downside is that it's not quite as strong, and if you stretch it too much, the paint can start to crack. With this particular 3D printed helmet, it just got a quick sanding, so it's not finished quite as well as I would have liked. But the advantages to 3D printing is that it's very sturdy, and if you finish it properly, you can get a really great high quality finish. The other great thing is, if it doesn't quite fit properly, you can just hit it with a heat gun and then kind of form it into shape, so it's really nice that way. Downsides, again, since it's a much sturdier material, is that it's not as comfortable to wear, but you can line it with foam to kind of get around that. The other problem is, since you can't flex it at all, I had to split it into two different pieces and then use buckles to attach them. But overall, either way, you can get some really great finishes with them. So yeah, let's dive into that prep work. Okay, so we're going to work on the Pepakura file first, and essentially what we want to do here is three things. We want to remove all the symmetrical pieces, so those are the pieces that are the same on both sides, because we're going to be doing a foam build for this helmet. We want to join pieces together wherever we can to make the build easier. And finally, this is just a personal preference, is I like to minimize the amount of white space we have, so I use the least amount of paper that I possibly can. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start dragging pieces off here. You can see I'm going to keep the pieces that are on the left side of the helmet. And I just start dragging all these pieces off. Again, I'm using Armorsmith here. The same thing applies if you're using Pepakura Designer. It works pretty much the same way. You can see the pieces highlight in red in the 3D view, so that tells me what the piece actually is. This piece is stretched across, so I'm going to split it. When I'm tracing it on the foam, I'll just flip the piece over and trace it as one singular piece. So you can see here I've essentially removed all the symmetrical pieces, as well as all the little details, because we're just going to cut those out and we'll build up those details using the layers of foam. Again, that'll make more sense as we get further along in the build. Same thing with all these little pieces. We'll keep essentially the outlines, and then we'll build up the details with the in-between parts. So now I'm going to start joining some of the pieces together to try and make bigger pieces. Um, Actually, my friend Stealth over at the Heroes Workshop recently had a really good tutorial on this. So if you need any more details, you should definitely check out his YouTube channel and see the videos he has up there. Essentially, the idea is to just keep trying and to join parts together where they can, and if there's any overlap, then disconnect them. So I'm kind of looking at, okay, which ones can join together here. That one kind of works. Bring it down. Try joining up some more parts. That one works. But then that one has overlap. So cut it. You just kind of keep going back and forth, trying parts, seeing what fits together, what doesn't fit together. So now I've got essentially all my parts, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving everything together to reduce the amount of white space that I have. I really don't care if pieces go across page boundaries, because really they're just templates, so I'll just be taping those together for the templates and tracing it onto foam anyways, so it doesn't matter if they go across multiple pages. If it uses up less space, then go ahead and do it. Some of these off-screen pieces were kind of in the way, so just moving those out of the way. So there you go. That's essentially the finished layout. Could probably reduce it down even more, but I'm happy with that. Okay, on to some prep work on the 3D print. So essentially what we need to do here is we're going to start splitting it up into separate pieces so that all the pieces will fit on the print bed. This might not necessarily be the best workflow, but I find it's the one that works for me. So I use the slice plane tool inside of Max to split them up. And so you can see I'm kind of figuring out, like, maybe I'll split off the top of the head here. Looks like a pretty good spot. And clone the part. And then we've got our first two pieces split up. Just hide that bottom one, work on this top piece, add another slice plane. You can see that rectangle I've placed on the bottom. It's just a guide I set up. It's just a spline that's the size of my build plate. So I have a good idea of exactly what the size is of each piece as I cut it up. There's no real science to this. Usually try not to slice up right along details, so like those parts on the top, I'm going to go right as close as I can to them. I don't want to go right in the middle because I'd like to try and minimize the seams as much as possible. Obviously we'll be filling the seams and sanding them down, so they hopefully shouldn't be noticeable anyways, but you know, make our lives a little bit easier here. Okay, so now I've got those two parts there. take a look at that, just making sure that it'll fit on the build plate. Looks like it will. Probably change the orientation at the end anyways, but it's a good sized part. Essentially, you want to make the parts, at least personal preference, as big as possible. Maximize the prints. And now what I do is I go through and I select the, essentially in the corners, the two sides, and I bridge those two edges. And I just go through and I do that bridge on all the edges, like the bottom corners like that, because then what I can do to speed things up, after I bridge this one, is I use this tool and select the whole outline, and then I can select all the outlines of the parts, and I just use this cap tool, and that caps it off. And so it makes it solid again so that we can slice it properly, and it's a watertight mesh, which is what you need for 3D printing. It's really important. So I went through and did that for the entire helmet. And see, it's all sliced up there, ready for the next step. So what we need to do now is figure out the best orientations for how we're going to orient the parts on the build plate. And essentially the idea here is you want to minimize the amount of support material that you have to use. And so anywhere where there's overhangs or anything like that is where you'll need supports. So at first I was just thinking, like, get a good quality print by making those pieces flush with the build plate. And so I went through and I rotated all the pieces around to what I thought I'd be happy with. So this is definitely an iterative process, and you kind of learn as you go on the best way to orient the parts. So I looked at that and thought, oh, okay. But then I realized, oh, underneath the mask there's these like terrible overhangs, and that'll use so much support. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this around like that, and then I'll just need a little bit of support to kind of bridge that, and that'll make for much better print. Here I'm just creating a rectangle spline so that I can get an idea of where the bottom is, so I can get it oriented just right. Just a little tool I use. I'm going to do the same thing here. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, so now I'm back in Mesh Mixer, and I'm going to use Mesh Mixer to generate the support material. And so I use this overhangs tool, and what it does is it analyzes the mesh and it finds where any possible overhangs could be. So you can see the red areas are the areas that'll need support. So you can imagine if those areas underneath there had been on top, you would have had to generate big columns of support material in order to print this thing properly. And if those supports had fallen, you could screw up the build, and you don't want that. Okay, so now I'm in the overhangs. Into this support generation. I use the Ultimaker 2 default settings because my printer is essentially an Ultimaker clone, but really you could use any of the settings. So right now I'm just adjusting the post diameter, so that's essentially how big the columns are going to be, like how thick. Again, layer height, I print at 0.2 millimeters, so I'll leave that as is. Density, I'm not sure. The base diameter, sometimes adjust that a little bit. And max angle is the other big one, which you'll see in a minute here. So we calculate what they'll be. So here's the first pass at what the overhangs could be, which these are okay, but you can see some of them are kind of at a steep angle, and that makes me a little nervous to try printing that. spin around the mesh here. You can see all of them. So yeah, like that one there, that's it's a little iffy. Same with that one. Don't like that. And I always get confused with this one, as you'll see here. I'm setting it back to, I think, 30 when I actually want to go the other direction. Essentially, it's saying that I should never generate a support that's more than this angle. So actually, I'm pretty happy when I use about 55, 60 degrees. So once you have that, you remove the supports and then generate them again. Okay, now these ones I'm pretty happy with. So what we want to do is convert to solid. And then that essentially does like a Boolean operation and subtracts everything and makes it like a nice watertight mesh, which again is what you need for 3D printing. So I'm just going to export this out. Okay, perfect. And now we have to bring it back into Max to clean it up because for whatever reason, they leave like this little bit of mesh at the bottom, which we don't want. So again, we're just going to use a slice plane to clean that up. Be great if Mesh Mixer could do this on its own. Maybe it can. I just don't know what the steps are, but it isn't too bad to just go through and do this quickly. Perfect, and we'll export that out. And here we are now in Cordia 1, which is a Kira clone that comes bundled with my printer. We're going to load in that mesh. And it's too big at this orientation, so I'm just going to rotate it around a little bit. Make sure it fits on there. There we go, perfect. And now we're ready. Let's see, we'll just double check the settings, make sure that it's not trying to generate any supports. No, that's set to off. And we can slice. Yeah, infill, 25%, that should be good. One walls, that should be fine. Slow down the speed a little bit. Yeah. And away it goes. Alright, so that about covers it for this episode of Pep vs. Print. A little bit longer than our last episode, but I really wanted to get through all that prep work so we could get started on the build. To just give you a little bit of build comparison, so far I've spent about an hour and 45 minutes getting our Pepakura build prepared, and roughly 3.5 hours preparing our 3D printed build. You can see that with the 3D prints, there's quite a lot more preparation work, but obviously the prints come out a lot quicker than putting everything together. Okay, so next episode we'll be starting to build and print, so stay tuned. If you like the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, and if you want to see some of my other projects, make sure to check me out on Facebook at www.facebook.com/thearmoredgarage. Thanks, and bye for now.